a welcome to this session on 500 million consumers for every startup in Europe. What's missing? So just imagine a world in which every startup in Europe had 500 million customers at once, from 28 different countries, from Vilnius to Lisbon, and from Dublin to Bucharest. The internet makes that possible, in theory at least. Online, we can connect, communicate, we can buy, and we can sell. But according to the EU, only 7% of all small and medium-sized businesses in Europe sell online across borders. So, what are the key barriers that are deterring more of them from taking advantages of this digital revolution? We heard from the European Commission Vice President in our opening session some of the barriers as he saw them. We also heard from our first panel how important this question of startups and them enabling to scale up and take advantage of these 500 million consumers was. So there could be nothing more central. So what are the obstacles? Will our panel agree with what we heard in the opening session? And crucially, what do we need to do to, and I'm quoting from the Commission's own digital market strategy earlier this year, tear down those regulatory walls? So let me introduce you all, and please do come and join me as I introduce you. Michal Mottl, economic analyst in the Digital Single Market Unit in the Directorate General for Communication Networks, Content and Technology, known in Brussels these days as DG Connect, in the European Commission. Daiva Raikoskata, who is CFA, founding partner of LLP Business Angels Fund 1 in Lithuania, and I'm sure Daiva will tell you more about what that is a little bit later. Daumantas, I'm going to mispronounce this, I've tried it several times, Divlinskas? Close enough, thank you very much, you're very kind. CEO and co-founder of TransferGo. It's a way for workers to send money home, those exercising their right to free movement. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that later on. Paula de Winter, Directorate of Regulatory Reform and ICT Policy in the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the Netherlands. Very warm welcome to you. And Žilvinas Šilenas, who is president of the Lithuanian Free Market Institute. A very warm welcome to all of you. No opening remarks, no statements. We're going to dive straight in. I have some questions for the panel, and then I'm going to come out to all of you. But forgive me for a moment, ladies and gentlemen. I don't appear to have a glass, and you have two here. So I'm just going to steal one, because I have a little bit of a cough this morning, so need the water to keep going. So let us dive straight in. As I said, mentioned at the beginning, 7% of SMEs taking advantage of this ability to trade, to sell your products and services across line. Only 15% of consumers taking advantage of the possibility to buy things across line. How important do you think it is for our smaller companies, our startups, to begin to take advantage of the digital revolution? And how important will that be for us, our economy as a whole? Michal, a thought from you on this, please. It should be on. You just talk and they pick up which mic it is. Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2. Maybe. Pass another one and I'll have a look at that one. Give me that one a minute. Is that one working? Let's have a look. I don't think they're on. Hang on a second. Let me just see if I can. Come on, little. I'm just talking to the microphone. I don't know whether it'll work, but.
That one. Yeah, this one. Okay. This one does work. So I think we should differentiate between. I mean, obviously, access to 500 million consumers is important for both for SMEs and startups. But I think we should make an important distinction between startups and SMEs. Not so most startups are SMEs. Not all SMEs are startups. Yeah. And I think the access to 500 million consumers to the market that Europe offers is especially important for European startups, because and we meet a lot of startup associations, and they always tell us there are 3 keys for success for us. One is an innovative business model that is relatively easy to scale, that is based on technology. Another one is speed, bringing a product quickly to market and quicker than our competitors. And the third is the scale of the market. How many people can we quickly reach? And startups, innovative startups, are extremely important for Europe. They bring about 60% 60% of economic growth in Europe is attributable to innovation, to the disruptive innovation of the type brought by startups. 50% of new jobs are created by companies that are younger than 5. So this is a hugely important area. And as we have heard in previous panels, there remain serious regulatory barriers, differences between the 28 member states, which create uncertainty and create costs for these startups to quickly scale. These regulatory barriers are often not a problem for huge companies, which have the means to hire lawyers, to hire translators, to understand the even small distinctions between member states. But this is much more of a challenge for a small, innovative company.
So it's this fragmentation, the simple complexity of the whole thing which deters them from doing so. Diva, you provide risk capital funds for innovative startups, those who are the more risk-taking. What for you is the key challenge? Why are we struggling to get more of our small companies to really seize the advantages that could be had in the digital revolution?
Actually, the main maybe obstacle or risk from startups and small companies is because they do not know how to reach them.
Yeah.
Actually, how to market, how to present their product, and so on. The other obstacle is that not all consumers, as you said, only 7% of consumers use the internet to buy products. So the main problem I see that not every consumer has an infrastructure to use an internet. And if all consumers could have that, I believe that our small companies and startups would triple the level, how faster and how more they can reach new consumers.
So we need that fast, reliable connectivity as the prerequisite, otherwise they won't see the benefits of doing this.
Of course.
And that's at the heart of it. Thank you very much. And this crucial question of, I don't know. I simply don't know which rules to follow. Your point, and I think it was made also by the big companies in the first panel. They said, we're okay. We can do this. We have the resource. The problem is for you. We'll come back to how do you help them know their rights a little bit later. But Dalmantas, from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest, how important is it for us to address this issue for our economy? We talked about that quite a lot in the opening session. And the biggest challenges for startups, for small companies to really take advantage of what's out there?
So I think the great benchmark would be US for Europe, because the promise of European Union was, one currency and still is one currency. Hopefully that will stay. And a more unification, because that makes us more competitive. Why there's major, or all of the biggest tech companies have been born out of the States, not Europe, because they start with a unified market which has hundreds and hundreds of millions of unified customers that, they speak the same language. They have similar behavior patterns, even though, the coast of US and the middle of the US is vastly different, So we also have differences here, but what we struggle to understand is that unification works and should help us all. So once we unify this, and unification here, we're not talking here that, the cultural differences should be erased. That's never going to happen. But we should understand that regulations should decrease. We shouldn't treat countries bound by different walls as if they're different economic units, very much, because they should be treated as the same. So for example, my business is sending money across borders, right? So we are as international as it probably gets. So for us, regulation, so that one bank, sort of Lithuanian bank, for example, recognizes UK banks' license as equal and don't ask many questions. That's a very clear example of how that helps us.
And what's it like now? When you move into a new country, just how tough is it for you?
So Lithuania is great. Baltics is great. And we need to go country by country. Most of the countries are getting better. Spain, Norway, they have their own view on the regulation, which is not very cohesive with the entire regulation. So I think things are getting better, but it could be getting better quicker if people would just open up more. Because everyone's a bit afraid, especially the more developed countries that are afraid to let in the less developed ones
Yep.
into their regulation, because I think it's going to be corrupting them somehow. It's not true.
Paula, from your perspective, and the Commission itself has estimated in its digital single market strategy that small companies face €9,000 of extra costs in order to comply with these different administrative rules in the different countries. That's a huge cost for many a startup struggling to get going. What do you think the challenge is? And do you think we're doing enough to help our startups really seize those opportunities?
Well, maybe we're, from the Netherlands point of view,
Yeah.
We want that digital single market. We want to go forward. It's really, really necessary. And it's in helping our startups. We try, but it's
Can you hold the
difficult.
microphone up a bit? In this room,
Yes.
it echoes a little bit. Thanks.
Okay. But it's really, really difficult because we have to do it with 28 countries at the same time. It can't be only the Netherlands or only Lithuania that votes for maximum harmonized regulation. So we got that one single market. It's something we need to do all together. And then we can help with centers to simply help them get through all different kind of legislation. But that's not really what a startup wants to do. They don't want to be busy with going through legislation. They just want to get their product to the market. They just want to be an entrepreneur. So I think we don't do enough, or at least we try to, but we need to make it an effort altogether.
That's a very interesting point, because there's a clash of culture there between all these requirements that need to be fulfilled and the sort of person who launches a startup, who has a great idea in her own and thinks, hey, I want to get out there and do it. And so for them, the burden is even bigger than it would be for a more traditional SME. You drew that distinction at the beginning, Michal. But Žilvinas, from your perspective and what you've heard, what for you is the toughest challenge to get more of these startups to scale up, to take advantage of this, and also the traditional SMEs as well, because if small companies are to thrive in the modern economy, a lot of their competitors could be stealing their customers by selling cross-border. So do we need to focus on both the startups and the established SMEs, or would you put all the emphasis on these bright new entrepreneurial startups?
Well, I don't see a big difference between the two. What is a startup and what is an SME? They're both basically new companies. Maybe when we talk about startups, we talk about network economies. And in that case, they need to expand swiftly. But the main challenge, I think, which we are all forgetting, is that business is actually difficult. I mean, in order to have the people buy your stuff or your app or your service, it actually, first of all, it has to be useful to the customers. And it is really, really difficult to invent a new Facebook. Many people tried, few succeeded. So that's point number one. Now, from a policy point of view, obviously, I think we are overplaying the harmonization of rules too much. If rules are bad, it doesn't matter if they are harmonized or same in all the countries. In other words, even if the rules are similar or the same in all the countries, bad rules are still bad rules. So we need to not only to harmonize regulation, but simply cut it. And Europe is really, really good at restricting business. And I think whether we talk about startups or SMEs, number one priority should be cutting the red tape, and only later making sure that the red tape is similar in all the countries.
Okay, Michal, I have to give you a chance to respond on that. Can we pass, one of the mics back down this way? So it's not just they need to be the same, and there is this great effort underway at the moment in the European Commission, in the EU, to look at what we have on the legislative books and see where it's imposing unnecessary burdens and so on. But would you say we need smarter regulation for our smart startups?
I mean, I think I absolutely agree that we need less regulation, we need smarter regulation. I take all these points. You know, the problem is that if we don't do it all together, if there's no level of some minimum harmonization on the European level, we have 28 member states, each with their own political process, each with their own priorities, and the problem there is that fragmentation leads to barriers for companies, and we've heard from a practitioner that it's better to have one set of rules, even if I think the aim should be to make them the best possible, but it's generally a lot easier to deal with one set of rules than with 28 sets of rules. And among those 28, there are probably some better and some worse. But if you want to scale, it's really important. And coming back to the point on SMEs and startups, well, some SMEs are, all companies are important, business is very important, but some SMEs don't really need to scale. I mean, if someone is a hairdresser, they're an SME, small, medium-sized enterprise.
It's also not easy to offer your services cross-border if you're a hairdresser,
but
because
for a
you've got to
startup,
actually physically go and cut the hair.
Yeah, but for a startup who is offering an innovative product, they really want to bring it to consumers across the European market, it's really important to have one set of rules.
Okay, but are you saying, therefore, that the more traditional small company, even if it is offering a service that can be sold across line, you don't believe that in today's connected world, they too will have to be taking advantage, otherwise they're going to lose out to somebody who comes in and steals their patch, as it were?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they even if they're not offering the service cross-border, they might be purchasing some things that they're using for their business from. Let's say a restaurant might be buying some, good food or recipes or maybe kitchen things. Maybe they can buy it cheaper cross-border.
Diva, could you say a little bit about your fund and explain exactly what it does? And also, I mean, nobody has mentioned yet as a challenge access to finance. We've had a lot of debate in Europe over the last few years about particularly access to finance for risky things. People saying there is money out there, but for the innovative, the really innovative, and I liked Gilles Renas's point at the beginning, it's not easy. A lot of them will fail. What do you encounter when you're working with startups, small companies, as the biggest barriers that they face? Is it the money or is it the other things?
Shortly, our fund is Business Angels Fund, is fully funded by the European Investment Fund, Jeremy Co-Investment Fund program. And we are investing together with business angels as a private persons. And it means if we are funding a company where we would like to put, for example, 200,000 euros, so business angel has to put the same amount or at least the same amount to that company. So we are like a venture capital fund, but investing only with business angels. And in 6 years since our start, we reviewed more than 500 business plans of various startups and small companies. And what we see, actually, the main obstacle is finance, but it's only the one. And the second is skills, how to make that business. So we are coming with finances and with business angels who have the skills and support the startups to grow or to develop their product and the idea. And what is it in Lithuania and what I see is in Europe, it's the same. To get a finance from banks for startups or even small companies which turnover is less than X amount, it's very difficult. And therefore we need such a funds who can help the companies. And it's not because of the problems of the banks, it's not because of the problems in regulation of the banks. Because if they would get money, would put money to startups, then the risk of the bank increases, So the small companies has an.
Domantas, how long have you been going? When did you launch?
3 years ago.
3 years ago. And what was the biggest? Was money an obstacle for you? Did you get funding relatively easily to get started, or was that a big issue? What was the biggest barrier? And how fast are you growing now? How many? You're already in a huge number of countries, aren't you? 23, was it? Something like that?
I think even more.
Even more.
Yeah.
How have you been able to grow so fast?
Well, I think that there is no shortage of financing in Europe. And I think we should look at pan-European wise, not only in Lithuania, because you can fly to London. It's just 2 hours, as we discussed before the panel. And Ryanair is pretty good. So, but the reality is that, and I agree here with the previous statement, is that in order to raise money, you need to know what you're doing. And you need to show that you have a credible business case, not only building something that will or might not work, but you need to show that you've built stuff before. So for us, it like fundraising is always difficult. If you've done it before, you haven't, because you need to ask people for money, you need to prove them some future reality. So it's not going to be easy. But for us, it probably was a bit easier because we have done previous companies before, and we failed them before, so we had a certain credibility. Okay, these guys will not probably make the same mistakes, they will do other mistakes. So this is what we've done. So we learned from the mistakes that we had, and we know previous companies took us to Silicon Valley and back, so we learned from people who really know what they're talking about, and we brought this expertise to the business, to the third one. So there needs to be patience there, and that's what I tell to first-timers, just learn as much as you can and have an open mind.
Can I just ask you, though, I mean, you learn from others, but we talked a little bit in the opening session about how the different mindsets in different countries, the different stages, we were talking about how this region, for example, can leapfrog, and has in some cases already. To what extent could you take the experience from someone in the States and say, oh yeah, okay, we won't do that, we'll do this, and it's relevant here?
I think it's spot on relevant. I was fortunate enough to get mentors who've been funding or founding one of the major tech brands in the world, right? So their experience, how to build a great culture in the business, that's scalable. How to build a market product fit so that people want to use, that's universal. How to be lean and not to waste money, that's universal. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things that you can learn, and it's important to make these bridges with US and London and Berlin to learn from people, and that's how you leapfrog. It's not working with the East that much. You won't leapfrog that. You need to work with the West and US to leapfrog entire Europe to get their best know-how.
Thank you. Paula, in terms of the obstacles, this question of finance and access to new forms of finance, how important is that now? There's a lot of emphasis put on it at EU level in recent years, saying because of the banking crisis, that was the logjam. Diver, I think, is suggesting there it wasn't really. That's not really why we had a problem. But also, the Commission Vice President mentioned in the opening session lots of other issues. He mentioned parcel delivery, the cost of getting things delivered across border. One thing that's not been mentioned is whether consumers feel that their rights will be protected if they buy something and it doesn't work or whatever. Do you think it's this fragmentation of the rules that really is the key challenge, or are there these wider issues? How important is the money in all of this?
I think the money is quite important, specifically because if you want to start up a company right now, we know that the investment in the beginning is actually higher, but then to roll it out over Europe to actually get more customers, it doesn't cost that much. A digital product, you can easily copy it, you can easily provide it again to someone else. It's different than with a physical product. So the costs of basically, once you've made it and then selling it again and again and again, is actually lower if you have the 500 million customers at hand. So I think the issue of finance will become even more important once we go to more digital economy.
Thank you very much. And Jovelis, you said it's actually difficult. It's tough, and many things will fail. Therefore, having people who will provide funding, whether it be loans or guarantees, whatever it might be, in many cases where things won't come off, it won't work, is very central for you. Do you think also, though, that the Commission Vice President's focus on some very practical issues, like the cost of deliveries, etc., is he right to be focusing on both ends of the spectrum?
Well, I think there is a lack of focus on both ends of the spectrum. I mean, what we just heard is that cutting or reduction of the rules is really difficult because there are 28 governments and yada, yada, yada. I mean, whenever the Commission wants to impose some sort of new rule, let's say, for example, a financial transactions tax. I mean, they're imposing it even if some countries are threatening to leave the EU because of that, they're still doing it. So whenever a new rule is being imposed, it's all fine. Whenever someone wants to reduce rules, we always hear that it's really difficult. So I wish that were true when we're speaking about raising taxes. I wish raising taxes was as difficult, or people would provide so many reasons not to raise taxes as they do when someone proposes to reduce taxes. Another good example, parcel delivery. The fragmentation of the market isn't the source of the problem. The source of the problem is the national mail post services, which have government-guaranteed monopolies in their areas. So if we just FedEx it or UPS it, there is no problem. The problem is that there are all the governments who want to, for some political reasons, have their national post offices, which are all failing and being subsidized by taxpayers' money, but for that silly reason, we still have them. Who sends stuff by mail these days? Nobody, even maybe Christmas cards, but even though you can FedEx that. So my point, I think, we are not looking at the source of a problem too much. We are trying to, yes, we're trying to harmonize parcel delivery rates, but that doesn't need to be done. We just need to eliminate the national monopolies on post, and the market will take care of this problem.
Okay, did you want to come back? Did I see? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, this parcel delivery problem is equivalent to cross-border money movement problem. And the problem is the same. Like, for 50 years, banks and Western Union have been dominating the market and taxing the poor 5 to 7%. Every single time they send money, and worse even, they weren't even informing them they were doing that. No transparency, whatever fees. That's how you build a $9 billion business. Or
I was going to say, that's where your business has come from, yes.
So what's happening right now, this monopoly is broken down. So now there's a couple of players in the market. They all have competitive rates, which are 15 times cheaper. Right, 15 times cheaper and quicker, and so there is no downside to the new services coming in, such as ours. So this is a very good example of how putting in, and demonopolizing a market can bring a lot of value to the consumer, because for consumer you save them 20 or 30% of their annual income on this, because they send that much. So that's a lot.
Mihail, I thought if I could on this, because I'm thinking here about probably, if you had to say, that there's an old Monty Python film that says, what did the EU ever do for me? And the one thing that is becoming, people can say now, and sort of have recognized, is roaming charges in the telecom sector. And yes, the EU did for me that when I travel abroad, it doesn't cost me as much. Do you think a focus on doing the same, not been hugely popular with the telecom sector, it's got to be said, but was a liberalizing measure, was intended to free the market up, do you think that is part of the answer, that we need to do the same with banking, with other things, or where Žilvinas is coming from in terms of we just need to break down some of these monopolies and open it up, and competition will do the rest?
Well, I fully support your point. I think it's a valid point. We have 28 basically monopolies, and yeah, regarding roaming fees, this is I think in a similar way about postal delivery reform. I mean, what we need is probably at some later stage to address the issue of these national monopolies, to introduce more transparency as a first step into this whole process, and hopefully, Rome was not built in a day, but because we're dealing with 28 different member states with their own interests and own postal regulators, but hopefully, as the example of roaming fees has shown, it is possible. With a bit of patience, we can address this. And I think the postal delivery is one of the main things that is holding this dream of 500 million customers, at least for physical goods.
Žilvinas, I just wanted to ask you, do you think what was done with roaming charges is the right approach? Is that the way we need to go? Because as I say, many would say, hang on a minute, you interfered with our business model. The telecom sector will say, you want us to invest in the infrastructure, the broadband, etc., and you're taking away our revenues. So they would argue that it's bad rules as well. Where do you come down on this?
Very sort of funny story, I bet. Who are the people who benefit from reduction? What socio-economic group benefits mostly from artificial reductions in roaming charges? So people who can travel abroad and who can make calls abroad, and probably usually members of European Parliament, right? Who keep on traveling abroad and get their charges. So obviously,
you really don't like the European Union, do you?
Yeah. So the point is, we are probably, the money has to come from somewhere. When we don't live in the magic world simply by waving the wand, we can reduce the prices. Things don't work that way. So either this artificial reduction comes as an expense of investment, expansion plans, or local market. And probably will depend on the local context. So I think this is actually the idea was good, the implementation was wrong. But I don't want to get it expanded.
No, okay. I want to come back in a moment on, apart from smarter regulation and finance, what very practical help SME, sorry, I think I'm popping a bit. Let me move that away from my mouth a bit. What practical help, what is the policy environment we need? And also, going back to something you talked at the beginning about, big companies can cope with this fragmented markets. The smaller ones, the startups can't. We're focusing a lot on the policymaker end of this, but I'm thinking about within the business world, what big companies can do, and I don't know, Diva, whether in terms of some of the things that you help to fund, whether these are people, startups working in hubs with bigger companies. How can we create this sort of ecosystem that really works for startups, where they get the support they need from a policy side and from big established companies? But before I do that, does anybody have a comment to what they've heard or a question for our panel? Anyone want to join in the discussion at this point? Or are you enjoying me grilling the panel? Or have you fallen asleep? I hope nobody's done that. Okay, let us come back on that question. So what can we really do in a very practical, concrete way? You said at the beginning, you know, people, sometimes small companies simply don't know how to do it. So are there practical ways in which policymakers and other companies can help them and give them the know-how to do it? Thoughts on that? Who would like to come in? Paula, in terms of from a government perspective, do you think this is an area where policymakers can do more to make small companies feel comfortable with doing this?
And with this you mean working with big companies?
No. In terms of taking advantages of the digital revolution, in terms of scaling up by using the internet, by reaching those 500 million customers. They don't do it because they don't know how to do it. Can you help them with that?
Well, I think for the governments it's really important to teach all the youngsters, but also the older ones, e-skills, digital skills. It's really, really important that we take that into our education system. And for instance, at the moment in the Netherlands, it's not obliged to follow something like digital skills, which is, and this goes beyond using the internet. Anybody here, I'm quite sure, knows how to go on the internet, go to a website, and probably will also be able to buy something there. But it's also understanding how the digital world works and what it can mean for the product you are selling. Yeah. So it goes beyond just being able to go on the internet. It goes towards what you can do with data, what you can do with the internet, how you can use it to sell your product, and how it's different from a market where people can't touch your product.
Absolutely, and I'll come to you first, Gilles, but then, Diva, you also talked about skills, and you meant there not the digital natives. We saw hundreds and hundreds of them, thousands are coming to this event, young, bright digital natives, but the capacity to develop a product and so on. But Gilles, you grabbed the mic, so did you want to come in on this point?
2 points.
Yeah.
About the government's role. So the first funny point is this, to quote Ronald Reagan, the scariest thing that businesses can hear is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help you." That's sort of the scariest thing that anyone can ever hear. On a more serious side, sharing economy opens up the possibilities for people to actually engage in the market by drastically reducing the transactions costs. So basically, what was just an operation, someone baking a cake for their neighbors, can now very easily move into the cake business, or funding, or lending people money. So the sharing economy is blurring the line between the formal economy and informal. So my point is that the government can take 2 approaches. One of them is to try to regulate these, let's say, this sharing economy like a regular business, and I think that will fail. That will destroy totally the point of the sharing economy. So the correct is approach to deregulate and allow all these very interesting small businesses to develop into the myriad of the activities that they actually do. I think that's the correct approach.
I want to challenge you on that a little bit later, because I want to ask you in terms of consumer, we talked, and it was mentioned in the last session, the question of consumer trust. And the customers. So these startups need customers. If the customers, only 15% of them are shopping online across borders, and it's because it is said they don't know what their rights are, they're worried, they're not sure they're protected, etc. The Commission would argue, and I'll give you a chance later to talk about this, but just to put it in your head, they would say, without consumer protection rules, for example, people aren't going to shop online. They simply won't trust the system. Data protection, to know what you're doing with my data. Crucial issues. So question, is there a role for government there? But we'll come back on that. So I just want to stick with this point first. Diva, you talked about skills. What sort of skills? It's not digital skills. They're startups taking advantage of this new world. What are the skills they need, and how can you and policymakers help? And then, Diamantis, I'd like to ask you what you got from policymakers, if you got any support, and what was most helpful. But Diva first. There's a mic there.
The first and main important skill is marketing skill. How to market the product, how to promote the product. That's the point. If you don't know how, then you will not sell. You have to know how to sell. Therefore, we need to hire professionals who can make your brand, who can build your brand, who could, somehow pack your product in order to be attractive and so on. And for that, they need money, a lot of money, and then we are coming.
So is that something, in terms of helping with that marketing thing, is it a question just of providing the money to do it, or is it also a question you have, for example, in many countries, marketing boards for different sectors or for types of products? Is that the sort of support that can be provided? Somewhere you can go and say, I really don't know how to get started. Can you find me a partner? Can you find me someone to work with on this? Or
I think what the government can do, it is just maybe to help the startups to go to other markets and to show them there. But the main, I think, issue is just to get the freedom for startups to do the business. They will find where to hire professionals to make marketing. They will find the media company, how to promote their product. They will find everything. Just give them freedom.
Thank you. Diamantis, for you, I don't know whether you turned to any public source of help, funding or whatever. If you did, what was your experience? If you didn't, is there anything that would have been helpful that wasn't there that you needed?
Well, I fundamentally agree with Žilvinas' point that the government's role is not to help you build your business. The government's role is to remove obstacles for the business to become the business and to grow. So the least government is always good. And unfortunately, we are living in a socialist environment, and there's ups and downs on that. But that fundamentally prohibits. And it's a strange thing. A lot of people think that the socialism helps the end consumer because it protects them, but they don't get the best services because entrepreneurial spirit is not fully utilized. So they don't get the best innovations because they never get to market. So I think deregulating, and I'm not talking, being fully American, Republican style, Trump and stuff like that. I'm talking about going away from this socialism into a nice mix. So from our point of view, we never asked government to help us do anything, right? It's never been like, can you help us find a marketeer? Can you help us learn something? It's not the role of the government. Absolutely. But what is the role of a government? And I think what Lithuania has been quite good at, especially Enterprise Lithuania, they've been able to make some bridges with the US, with London, with Berlin. They were taking people, the prospective entrepreneurs to there and helping them get new networks. Because only through new networks can you get those skills. Because marketing and branding on a large global scale is not a skill that you can learn in the Baltics, because there were very few, if arguably none, global Lithuanian brands that have made it from Lithuania and are now known globally. There isn't any. Therefore, there isn't really any know-how in how to do that. Whereas from the UK, from Germany, there have been multiple. And you meet these people, and since Lithuanians are smart in nature, they have a very good secondary education, they will pick up very quickly. And that's where the breakthrough should do. But it's all about who you learn from. That's very important.
So is part of those networks, I mean, we've talked, and it's already been mentioned this morning, Silicon Valley. One thing that policymakers in those sorts of areas have done is create that ecosystem, is build a place where universities and businesses, big businesses, small businesses, individuals who are creative can go and find like-minded folk to work with. So when you say it's not for governments, is that part of their role, to create those platforms, whether they be networking opportunities, conferences, etc., or very physically putting these things together and creating, I mean, do we need to create our own Silicon Valleys physically, and then the companies move in and seize them?
It's not the role of the government to build those physically. It's private sector, because private sector would get the results at the end of the day. But what government should do is very wisely support it, and partial financing, but not fully. The government should never take over. And also what government should do is always think about, is the strategy that we had devised 10 years ago? And for example, in Lithuania, the strategy is we are the bridge between the East and the West. Yeah. Therefore, for example, it's being thought, and that's my perception, it's not maybe all real, but that we need to build a bridge with Russia, with Belarus, with all of these countries, and bring the West. I disagree with this. I think that for startups, you need to build bridges with more developed ecosystems and learn from them, and have good ties with Scandinavia and work with them, have good ties with London, Berlin, and Silicon Valley later on, because Silicon Valley is a bit unique. But Europe alone has a lot of good partners, but that needs to be sort of, who do we work with to grow, and which networks do we actually need to tap into? And one very good and quick example is the Estonian president. When he's Estonia is doing the same thing, right? And the Estonian president on stage is endorsing their startups and talking about startup stuff in a very fluent language, right? So that is just a signature for many foreign investors that Estonia is a nice place to do business with. So that's enough for the government to say, we will take care of you, we understand. That is enough, in my view.
Okay. Thank you. Michal, from your point of view, what do you see? Would you agree in terms of what the respective roles are? And could you please pick up on this point, because it is an argument made very strongly in Brussels, and the Commissioner talked about new rules, proposals for contract law later in the year to address consumer trust and confidence in the system. They're saying, you don't need that. That's just stifling the great entrepreneurial startup. Usually in Brussels, the argument is, customers don't have confidence, we need to give them confidence. How do you square that circle? Can you square it, or are you just doomed to disagree on this?
Well, regarding the first point, I think I completely agree that it is not the role of the government to give advice on marketing or business models, or I think the European Commission could itself use some marketing advice sometimes. I think you mentioned Silicon Valley, and I think the great thing that exists in that ecosystem is the number of they're often referred to as unicorns, or these large companies that have a valuation over $1 billion. And in Europe, we only have a handful of these companies that are, say, younger than 20 years old, yeah, that are successful. I mean, there's Spotify, there are a couple, but I think there are many more in Silicon Valley, and those are probably that's the group from where most of the mentors and most of the know-how can come and financing as well for small companies. So not from the government. Picking up on your point regarding consumer protection, I think this is a case of fragmentation. And I think consumers, in order to make purchases, they need some minimum level of trust. With consumer protection, as with contract laws, for example, there are still 28 different sets of documents. So let's say, from a point of view of a startup and entrepreneur, if they want to know what the rules are in the European Union, in the market of 500 million people, they have to take a pile of documents, multiply it times 28, yeah, and that's, let's say, the level of documentation that they would need to get through in order to understand what the applicable rules are. The advantage of harmonizing it to some extent is that you will reduce that number. I mean, you have less of things that you need to familiarize yourself. From a point of view of consumer, I think they would at least like to know that they are not at a disadvantage buying from outside of their own country. They know the rules, the rules applicable in their home country. They would like to be they would like to be sure that if they buy from outside of the country, they're even though the price is maybe a bit lower, that they're not losing some of the protection that they have.
And nearly 2/3 of them don't have that confidence, according to surveys. Yeah. Paula, you wanted to come in here, and then I'll come out to all of you again, and then I'll come back.
Listening to this conversation, I am like, yeah, okay, we can deregulate, and I'm absolutely pro deregulating, But one of the main tasks of a government is to safeguard some public interests. And if we don't do that as a government, then I'm not quite sure what we are here for, because being an entrepreneur is basically your own responsibility. You need to do it, you need to try it, and we can make the environment around it as a government as good as it gets. But we need to safeguard those public interests.
Okay, we could go on with this for hours. Quick one if you would, because then I want to come back to some very practical advice for startups, but please.
And the role of the adult consumer is to be an adult consumer. Let's not infantilize the adult people. They're smart enough to earn their own living. They're smart enough to make their own decisions. I mean, Uber and Bitcoin, they started without any regulation. Then there was a lag in regulation. These are very successful companies, and there is a huge consumer trust in them, despite there being any regulation.
Okay, we're going to get into a long philosophical debate if I'm not careful. So, quick one if you would, Dalmantas. Then I'm coming out to you, and then I want to focus on some advice for
Very
startups.
practical example. When a construction worker in London, who is Polish, is deciding which company he's going to be using for his money transfer services, and I'm always talking about my thing, but that's what I know. Last thing is, it's not on his mind, what does Brussels think about this? Is this a trustworthy company or it isn't? What they're thinking about, does my friend use it? Is there word of mouth? Can I trust this? They'll go Google, Facebook people, and he'll figure out for his peers. So this, and I agree with Žilvinas here, that consumers are smart. It doesn't matter in which segment of
Could I just stress, of course, there's a lot of, what we're talking about here is not just what Brussels thinks or doesn't think. What you've been talking about is harmonising national rules. So this is something member states are doing themselves, and now the suggestion is we need to have one set of rules. So it's not, we're not just talking here about if Brussels stops doing it, there are no rules and you guys can do what you like. It is precisely what the Commissioner is saying is, how can you operate, if you want to operate cross borders, with 28 sets of rules, and therefore we need to harmonise what we've got. But I think you make a very good point about where does the consumer go in their head for making their choices. I want you to give some very practical advice to startups in a minute, but anybody have a question? Yes, I see one over here. Hang on a second. It's a little bit difficult in this darkened room, but please. And could you introduce yourself before you?
My name is Bogdan Sarajinsky. I'm a recent graduate of Queen Mary University of London, and I have a question about taxation rules in the EU. According to the new rules, as it was mentioned by Amazon representative recently, the companies have to pay taxes in each member state where they supply the services, and it is a serious issue for young companies without resources. So my question to the panelists is, should this policy be scrapped as a part of digital single market?
Thank you. And there is, of course, some proposals, some suggestions of new proposals on value-added tax, but you're talking about corporate taxes as well. Do we need to look at that issue more? Any others before, just in the interest of time? I see one right over in the corner here. Thank you very much. Sorry, I walked that way. You were raising your hand this way. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I'm Hans Johansson. I just want to emphasize when it comes to giving advice to startups, how much American startups are facing legal risk. And you guys don't have that at the same extent that they do in the States.
To be sued, you mean?
Yes. So take more risk, be more aggressive, confront the big powers, the big companies, the governments of the world, and confront how they're based.
Okay, thank you very much. Any others before we come back? Okay, on that point, specific point about taxation, anybody want to come in, excuse me, slightly higher than I anticipated. Sure.
The issue here is that governments are looking at businesses as a sort of feudal masters back in the Middle Ages. You know, if the stuff has fallen off the cart, it's now the property of the landlord. I mean, here is a place to ask a fundamental question: what is this tax for? Just because someone is creating value? I mean, that tax is unjust and ineffective. I think we should start, whether in the framework of a digital single market or some other sort of framework, we need to fundamentally question the need for such taxes.
Okay. Michal, I don't know whether you can say anything, whether it's your area of expertise in terms of VAT and what's planned there to try and make life a little easier.
So it is not my area of expertise, but I'll try to say something anyway.
Thank you.
So I think we do realize that this is an issue for startups. There is a proposal to raise thresholds for small and medium-sized companies that is on the table. The origin of the problem, as I understand it, is that in the previous rules, there was the VAT was paid in the country where the company was based, and there was a lot of fear among member states that that would mean that large corporations would have the freedom to base themselves in the country with the lowest rate and basically sell all across the EU. And that would be a problem for small companies that would not be able to or move as quickly. And so that then the idea of the origin of the destination principle came in. And we do realize that that it is an issue for small companies, and things are being done to address this.
Thank you. Did you want to come in, Paula?
Well, as far as I know, you can actually go to the tax authority in your own country, and they will, you give your taxes there, and they will make sure it goes to 28 countries.
So it's their job to share it out.
It's their job to share it out. I'm quite sure that the system isn't perfect yet, it just got installed, but we don't want all companies to go to Luxembourg, for instance, whereas the taxes are very low, so a lot of digital companies went there. We don't want that. We want them to stay in Lithuania or in the Netherlands in my case, or basically. So I think the Commission and the member states are trying to make this better, but I think it's, I don't think we will see one European tax the next 20 years or maybe longer. Probably never.
Okay. Did you want a quick one on that? And then I want to come to some advice.
In terms of tax, UK is a very good example. UK is probably the most vibrant angel investment scene in Europe. So angel investors, wealthy individuals, are incentivized heavily by governments to invest in risky companies. And they do it by a very effective EIS scheme, when you get a 30% tax relief on all the monies that you put in. So the government is guaranteeing 30 cents on the pound that you invest.
Okay.
Wow. So that has decreased taxation, but increased revenue, because there's just so many more companies that are being specifically angel funded.
So it's a win-win.
So it's a reverse. What you think, like increasing doesn't work and decreasing increases revenue.
Okay.
That's
Did you want to add something there, Diver?
Yeah, and in the same time, the government gets money back from the income tax on employees and on profit tax and VAT. So it's business both directions.
Everything gains. Okay, I wanted to try and draw some conclusion of the session. I want to do two things, if I might. Sylvanus, can I start with you, and I'll come down the line. You heard me, and I want to do the same here, which is in terms of going back to the title of this event, 500 million consumers for every startup in Europe. If we had to identify one priority, one thing that needs to be done to enable them to take advantage of that massive market, what for you would it be? But also, if you had to give young startups, young entrepreneurs, either they haven't yet launched a startup, but they know they're going to. That's the way they want to go. They have that entrepreneurial digital spirit. One piece of advice to them, so taking aside from regulatory issues and the taxation issues and so on, one piece of advice for the startup and one piece of advice for policymakers.
Okay, so for startups, business is an honest man's game. It's not a con game. If you think that you'll launch something without value to consumers or society, and that will bring you billions, you are probably in the wrong business. Maybe you should go into politics instead. So if you're considering, if you really want to make a lot of money, you have to bring a product. And if you want to bring a product for 500 million consumers, well, your idea number one is this actually valuable to the consumers? Yeah. So that would be my thing. So don't think that all the quick get-rich schemes, they never work. So that's my point about the advice to the startups. And advice to the government is, once again, very simple. Businesses are creating value for society, not the governments. The role of the government is actually maybe sometimes to enforce some certain rules, enforce contracts, and maybe tweak sometimes. The government will not take place of business in creating value, and the biggest responsibility the government has is to make sure businesses can do their work easily and fast. That's my point.
Thank you very much. Paula?
Well, as giving advice to the government, that would be a little bit advising myself. So I will, as a policymaker, so I will keep it to giving advice to the people here is like, just try. It's, you know, try to make a product. It is not a shame, I think, to, if it fails, then you just get up and do it again. Because in the Netherlands, sometimes people are afraid to fall down the stairs, or, so that would be my advice. Go and try and be an entrepreneur.
And it's interesting you say that, because we didn't have a chance to discuss in this or the other session. We talk about digital mindsets, risk-taking, very different attitudes to failure on either side of the Atlantic. Daumantas, what for you would be your advice to someone who wants to follow in the path, in the steps of TransferGo? What would your biggest piece of advice to them be, and your biggest piece of advice to the policymakers?
That's a difficult question. I don't like giving advice to startups. The more I'm in
But
this
you
business.
took a lot of, you said you learned from other people's mistakes.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, if I was you coming to you for advice now, what would you tell them?
What I always say is that the biggest risk in this economy is to work for someone else, because you're not controlling your own fate. So control your own fate and do it with people, work with people that are your good mates, and the people that share, that have some complementary skills to you. So always think about who I really can trust and who can help me do something that I can't, and then go and do some business with them. And for that business, start with a problem that you face. Problem that is annoying you, that is annoying many people, and you want to solve that, and just go from there. And don't think a lot, what will happen, how will this make money, or, you know, just go and solve the problem, and the market usually pays for good solutions. For the governments, my wish Europe would be less socialist, so that's a wish. My advice would be for maybe the Baltic governments is to bridge better, to build better bridges with the Western Europe, especially, and other hubs. Because there's so much potential, there's so many good networks that we are still not tapping. I know our ecosystem is young, so it's 3 to 5 years only. But still, I think there is a lot of work to do there for governments to really go and help entrepreneurs build those bridges.
Thank you. Very concrete and practical suggestion there. Diva.
So my suggestion to all people who are here and not here and outside, you have to understand before starting that it will be not your job, it will be your lifestyle. You have to realize that now. And for government is just suggestion, just to give a freedom to startups and small companies and access to business network. It would be the best what the government can do.
So very much echoing there what Daumantas said and what Silvana said earlier. Michal, you have the last word. One piece of advice for yourself as a policymaker broadly, and one piece of advice for startups who really want to take advantage of the digital revolution.
Okay, so I think, well, for the startups, if I can make any type of advice, is, well, obviously concentrate, build a good product, but then also use the networks. This was already mentioned. Use the networks. Use the cheap flights to go make friends in other countries. Use the accelerators that you have here in Lithuania. Network with companies in other countries. In Poland, there's a vibrant ecosystem in Poland and Germany. Some advice for the policymakers. Well, we hope to finish or to have something very concrete to present by the end of next year regarding the DSM. And we're also consulting intensively with all stakeholders, and this includes startups and people who are already have one or are thinking of creating one. And we have a number of consultations open on our website. So rather than giving advice to myself, I would really like to ask you to give us advice and give us your take on whether you like this idea or not.
And they can find that by going onto the DG Connect. If they Google DG Connect, they'll find you. I don't advise going through the EU website search engine. It's a nightmare. But they can find those consultations, and they can give you their comments directly.
Yeah. For instance, one of the consultations that we have open right now is one on digital platforms. And if you Google the digital platforms consultation of European Commission, you will find the website.
Thank you very much. So he's here to listen. Please do give him your views. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed for a very stimulating discussion. Thank you all so much.